Thanks, Nick, and welcome to our first Keeping It Real of 2018, just in time for award season. Now, my original plan for this segment was to list my predictions for this year's winners of Best Picture, Actress, Director, Editing, etc. But as we're taping this, the Academy is getting ready to announce their nominations, and rather than risk predicting winners that may not even be nominated, I thought instead it'd be a good idea to list my top 5 personal favorite Best Picture Oscar winners. Now, understand that this is a subjective list. I am in no way going to pretend that there is some neutral criteria, so I'll be giving my opinion as to why I make my choices as we go. So let's get started. At number 5, I'm going to go with the most recent winner, 2016's Moonlight. Unfortunately, it may be best remembered as the recipient of an accounting snafu at last year's awards ceremony, where Faye Dunaway and Warren Beatty mistakenly named La La Land. Thankfully, they were corrected. This film is an intense, gorgeously shot character study of a man struggling with his identity and social standing in a very poor, very unglamorous part of Miami. Based on a semi-autobiographical play by Terrell Alvin McCraney, Moonlight follows 3 stages in the life of Chiron, played by 3 different actors, including Trevante Rhodes, who is due to appear in the next installment of the Predator series of all things. But I digress. Made for just over $1 million, it also stands as the lowest budgeted Best Picture on record. Now, that doesn't stop it from showcasing cinematography that borderlines on the impressionistic, and director Barry Jenkins had cited on record that Hong Kong filmmaker Wong Kar-wai is his primary influence. And if you're familiar at all with Chungking Express or In the Mood for Love, the comparisons will be pretty obvious. The last few minutes of this film are particularly heartbreaking, but the entirety of the journey is worthwhile. As an example of a masterfully made 21st century indie, it is a must-see. We're going to go back a few years for number 4, 43 years actually, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Author Ken Kesey disliked working with producer Saul Zaentz so much that he never saw the finished film based on his book. And that's unfortunate, because the result is nothing short of a masterclass in ensemble acting. Jack Nicholson and Louise Fletcher took home Oscar statuettes for their turns as R.P. McMurphy and Nurse Ratched, respectively. And rounding out the cast are a few faces less familiar at that time. Christopher Lloyd, Danny DeVito, Vincent Schiavelli, Scatman Carruthers, and then newcomer Brad Dourif as
Billy Bibbs.
This was only the director's 3rd English language feature. A member of what is informally known as the Czech New Wave, Milos Forman caught the attention of producer Michael Douglas with previous features Loves of a Blonde and The Fireman's Ball, the latter being banned in his communist homeland. Well, this background must have been the right qualification to tell a story about institutional authority and the human desire to break free from it. It worked out well for Forman, too. He won Best Director. Taken all together, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is often regarded as one of the best American movies ever made. Now, I chose number 3 for sentimental reasons. Growing up, I was never really a fan of Westerns, but I happened to catch this one when it was still in theaters by myself at a second-run show in Wyandotte where I was growing up. I'm talking about 1990's Dances with Wolves. Kevin Costner was a hot property during the late 80s, and as one of the most bankable stars in the world at that time, he could get any project made. By 1988, he had started his own production company, and one of his first option deals was a novel by Michael Blake, which tells the story of a disillusioned Civil War lieutenant stationed at a remote fort on the frontier at his personal request. During this time, he receives visits from a neighboring Lakota Sioux tribe, and it turns out this tribe, in particular, adopted a white woman whose family was killed during a Pawnee raid when she was a girl. Somewhat conveniently, this allows the lieutenant and the tribe to begin communicating and eventually form a bond. This bond is later put to the test when, well, I'm not going to spoil it for you if you haven't seen it. I'll just say this. For my 13-year-old self, the movie's 3-hour runtime flashed right by. And aside from Best Picture, it bagged 6 other awards for Best Director to Costner, Adapted Screenplay, Cinematography, Editing, Original Score, and Sound. Not bad for a directing debut. There is also a director's cut that runs almost 4 hours, but I don't find that version necessary. The theatrical version will do just fine. Now, we're going to jump ahead again to the new century for number 2. Now, this classic piece of filmmaking deserves recognition. The Paul Haggis feature, Crash. What an ensemble. Its subtle discussion of race relations is as timely now as it... Okay, that was a joke. I'm kidding. That movie was awful. Such an overwrought piece of dribble, badgering, ham-fisted message. Never watch that film, please. It sucks. Okay. And my actual choice for number 2, for real this time, is definitely deserving of its place, No Country for Old Men. Adapted by Joel and Ethan Coen from the Cormac McCarthy book, No Country serves as a decidedly different shift in tone from anything the Coens did previously. Now, while there's some humor in it, the movie itself provides a now classic example of what film critics call a slow burn narrative. Now, this is more than just creating suspense. It's an act of wielding that tension over the audience like a cudgel. The viewers have no idea what could come next, but when it happens, it's often swift and brutal. No Country, along with another title from 2007, There Will Be Blood, set the stage for other films like them to follow. You see this slow burn treatment in movies today like Wind River, Sicario, and Hell or High Water. Aside from that, it's also my personal favorite by cinematographer Roger Deakins. He was nominated for a 7th time for this film, and to my shock, he lost. Hopefully for Mr. Deakins, that will change this year. Best of luck, Roger. And finally, we come to my number 1. Now, I'm sort of cheating here because while I do love this movie and everything about it, I'm not actually making the choice myself. Let me explain. Years ago, when I would visit my late grandmother, who still lived on her own in her own apartment, I would make a note of 2 things. 1, this tiny Polish-Ukrainian woman rarely watched television, let alone movies. And 2, she owned a VCR and just 1 VHS cassette, as far as I know, and it was this movie, Amadeus. Adapted by Peter Shaffer from his award-winning play, this feature stars Tom Hulce, who turns in an Oscar-nominated performance as the title character, the incredibly gifted Wolfgang Mozart, whose well-documented excesses and debauchery serve as comic effect to underscore his music talent. But the story's focus actually falls on one of his contemporaries, a poisonously jealous composer named Antonio Salieri, played by Best Actor winner F. Murray Abraham. In truth, it's hard to know who steals the scene from whom in any given moment. Cuckoo's Nest director Milos Forman returns to the helm and shows us yet again his capacity to balance performances to such a high degree that he took home his 2nd Oscar for Best Director. Shaffer's script plays fast and loose with historical accuracy while weaving a very compelling narrative on the nature of envy and its destructive ends. Rounding out the supporting players are Elizabeth Berridge, Jeffrey Jones, Simon Callow, and a young Cynthia Nixon. Shot in Prague during the winter, it's a costume piece that guarantees to pull in the viewer regardless of whether you care about classical music. There's also a director's cut adding backstory that explains the later tension between Salieri and Mozart's wife, but in my opinion, again, I prefer the original theatrical version. Well, that's going to do it for this month. Best of luck to the nominees, although I am pulling for a certain flick that involves 3 pieces of public advertising. Also, please let Roger Deakins win. It's his year, it's his turn, he's waited so long. Anyway, that said, that'll do it for now. I'm Louis Kerman, and this has been Keeping It Real.